Welcome to another episode of Tech Marketing Trends, the podcast where we explore the cutting edge of technology, sales, marketing, and the trends shaping our future. Today's episode is titled Crafting Compelling B2B SaaS Narratives, and we're thrilled to have Naomi Soman with us. Naomi is a talented copywriter specializing in SaaS clients at Storylogick. Her expertise lies in creating powerful and persuasive content that drives engagement and conversions in the competitive SaaS market. So, with that very short introduction, welcome to Tech Marketing Trends, Naomi.
Thank you so much for having me.
Wonderful. I'm so excited. So, you're actually based in Tel Aviv and working in the Tel Aviv startup ecosystem. So, maybe you can, give us a little bit of background who you are and what are you doing and what you've been up to so far.
For sure. Well, I'm originally from New York and I have more of a literary background. That's what I studied in university. And when I came here, I was really excited about the startup ecosystem. There's a lot of new technology here. And so I drew on a lot of my knowledge of narrative and literature and stories and adapted it for copywriting. And so I draw a lot of inspiration from my favorite authors and literary theory and use that to help marketers make more out of their ad spend by tapping in to patterns in the way we think and the way we process information. And so a lot of times I work on big campaigns and Google campaigns, LinkedIn campaigns, events, webinars, and figure out how to take the data we have and turn those insights into much better creatives.
Awesome. Yeah. Great background. And now you're at Storylogick and works full time with SaaS companies and so forth, which is of our interest here at Tech Marketing Trends, of course. So we're going to dive into a little bit of buyer personas and how you work with that. Also adapting the messages across the funnel, which is key in order to achieve those conversion rates and so on. And maybe if we have time, a little bit about social selling and your take on that. So yeah, maybe we can, start from the top a little bit and you describe how you work with buyer personas and why that is so important for you as a writer and creating narratives.
Yeah, so your buyer persona is the hero of your story. So you really have to understand who it is and um, what they stand for. So a lot of times when we think of buyer personas, we think in terms of demographics. We think they make this much money per year, they have this many years of experience, they have this job title. Sometimes I know marketers like to be a little bit esoteric. They say they read these newspapers or um, they buy this brand of coffee. And I think both of those are sort of missing the mark. So what I do when I sit down to write to create a buyer persona is I try to think about moments in their life. So what was going on in their life when they realized they had a problem? And what specifically did it look like? For example, instead of saying they were feeling overwhelmed, say they have a spreadsheet with 17 tabs open and they can't keep track of the amount, they can't keep track of any of their work. And so they need some sort of solution to process all of that information more efficiently. And that's something really tangible that a lot of people can grasp onto and they can use in their everyday life. Or when I was working with a fintech company, it was we have all of these checks in our back room, and we don't have the resources to cash them because it's just too outdated, and we need something electronic to help us take payments online. And so I think that that level of specificity creates a character that's much more real and much more tangible, much more interesting. And so you can do that with the pain points they're experiencing. And then you can also do that with their life after your solution. So sort of a before and after, if you will. After they have your solution, what does that look like? Now, that could be more on a practical level, like they are able to track their team members more, or they have more visibility. But it could also be on more of an emotional level. Like maybe their team members say, wow, you're such a good manager. You have everything under control. Like people are people, even if they're in businesses. And so I think it's important when you're talking about the solution side of the narrative, the solution side, or the after side of the buyer persona, what success looks like for them on a tangible level and on more of an emotional level.
So good. And very, very important. And when you create the buyer persona and we start laying out the foundation of who is it I'm going to talk to, or create emotions for, or whatever it is we want to achieve as a copywriter, what elements do you typically include there, and how do you find that research?
So I try to record the two things that I mentioned before, a lot of their pain points and a lot of their goals, where they see themselves. And then the third part that I try to include is their doubts or their hesitations or their concerns or whatever it is that may be preventing them from moving forward. So that could be a lack of budget, that could be time restraints, that could be other stakeholders that are involved. That could be a number of factors. And I think that there are a lot of other things that you could bring in. You could bring in some information about their belief system, about their experience. But I think when it comes to buyer personas, it's important not to overcomplicate it, because a lot of times there's a whole team using this. You have a whole marketing team that needs to make use of this. And I think sometimes less is more. So I try to focus on those three things. And I think that's sort of the 80 and the 80, or that's the 20 and the 80-20. The thing that's really going to get you to the next stage, their pain points, their goals and dreams, and their hesitations and doubts. And the way that I put that together is I really listen to the customers themselves. So if I have access to customers and I can interview, I think that's ideal. Most of the time, though, that's not easy. So what I will do instead is I will go to Gong if a company is using Gong or one of the alternative solutions, or a lot of teams will record a lot of their sales calls and discovery calls because they want to have them on hand for training purposes and onboarding. So you can say, all right, or you can ask them to start recording their discovery calls on Zoom. Super easy, doesn't cost a cent. And if you take those discovery calls being the first 20 minutes that the salesperson speaks with a new lead, then you can you can listen to all of those calls. Then you can actually just copy and paste from the transcript exactly what it is they're saying, dump that into a spreadsheet or dump that into some sort of project management tool, and then you have that on hand. And you can pull from that anytime you need to create copy. So for example, I remember I was talking to somebody once and they said, I'm waking up in the middle of the night worrying about what I have to do the next day. And that's like a perfect example of, wow, this is a huge pain point and this is what it looks like. And that's something that everyone can relate to. And so you'll start to see patterns along those lines. And you don't really have to listen to all that many discovery calls to get these insights. I would say 3 to 5 is a really good start. And then you can add more to it as you go. Messaging and buyer personas, I don't think is something that you have to have everything down perfectly. I think it's something that can live and grow with you.
That's a great smart tip to use Gong and recorded sales calls where you can access to. So fantastic tip there. And so how do you manage messaging and content when you have multiple buyer personas? Because that's many times we want to talk to the C level or C-suite or something like that. How do you think about those opportunities? Do you actually do research on everybody, or are you focusing on one part of the problem set? Or how do you do that?
Yeah, I think this is a really important conversation for go-to-market teams to have. Now, a lot of times the the initial instinct is to say, yeah, we should absolutely go after upper management. And if that's the case, like definitely you should have a buyer persona for VPs and directors and people who are key decision makers. And then you should have another description, another buyer persona for the champion, and then maybe another buyer persona for finance, because finance is always brought into these decisions these days. However, I say that with an asterisk, because I think that upper management is less likely to be the person to seek out a solution, to go shopping for a solution. And if it comes across their desk, or they see it in a banner, or they hear about it, they may be less likely to pursue it, because they just have so many responsibilities. And on top of that, they're usually less connected to the pain point. So the things that happen every day that that the middle managers or the individual contributors are dealing with, the upper management tends not to be as connected to that. So I would say that if the upper management is really a key part of the early sales process, sure, then have a buyer persona for them. But a lot of times I think that we delude ourselves into believing, yes, they have to come in early, when a lot of times they're brought in later. It's a slightly different discussion, but it's important to remember that even if they're part of the sales process, they may not be driving that initial process early on. And when it comes to marketing, we want to be focused on that person who is going to first land in the CRM. And then later on, for more of a sales discussion, I think, sure, like have a buyer persona for them. But insofar as I work in marketing, I would say it's definitely worth testing. And that's where a lot of qualitative metrics come into play. You can say, like, are the opportunities coming in? Are these leads? What seniority level are these leads? Let's double down on that character.
Yeah, so interesting. I know a problem for many companies is that we spend money developing these buyer personas and things like that, but sometimes have a hard time to actually using them or leveraging them in the daily lives. I know HubSpot, for example, have this doll they took with them to conference rooms that represented the clients. And that was one idea, how to keep the client perspective in the room, so to say, when we're having discussions or taking decisions. Have any good examples from either a marketing perspective or just overall any clients you worked with that have internalized the buyer personas in everything they do? Any tips or inspiration from that perspective?
Yeah, great example. I remember reading about that from HubSpot, and I think that helps give you a tangible sense of who the customer is. What I like to do, I think the key word here is internalize, is get people to see these people as real people and understand them almost like an actor would. Like if you hear interviews from actors about how they got into a role, they would study how they speak, and they would read old letters, and they would look at old photographs, and they would become the character. And I remember going through this when I was at Monday.com, and I had a colleague who was sort of struggling with the concept. And instead of saying, because we were trying to discuss, okay, what is this specific pain point? Let's create a category for this. And he was kind of struggling. He didn't really understand how to articulate it. And I said, okay, let's put this down. Instead, you're going to be Chris. And Chris is a middle manager in this kind of company, and he's dealing with this. Just tell me a story about who Chris is and what's going on in his life. What does a day look like in Chris's world? And when I reframed it in that way, the person came to life. We know who he was and what his family life looked like. And he wasn't a profile on a piece of paper. He was a living, breathing person. And I think that's why it's so important to focus on these details, because oftentimes it's the details that move someone from being a profile on a piece of paper into a living, breathing human being in our imagination. And so I think that when you focus on, wow, this person is dealing with a spreadsheet with 17 tabs open and they have no idea what data they're looking at, they need more visibility, or they are waking up in the middle of the night worrying about this problem, or they're afraid that their upper manager is not going to be happy with the results this quarter. Those are things that real people deal with. And it gives you the sense of, oh yeah, I know that guy. That's a guy, that guy's my friend, or that guy's my neighbor, or yeah, I used to work with that guy. And I think it's a matter of internalizing a character rather than trying to come up with a set of characteristics that define them.
Wonderful. I love that definition. So if we're moving on to a little bit how now we have the platform in place with the buyer personas, things like that, and now we're starting to create messages, top of the funnel, for different parts of the different campaigns or marketing touches we have in our cadences or sequences. But you very strongly believe that we need to be very adaptable on the messaging across the funnel. So can you talk to me a little bit about why that is so important and your thoughts about that?
Yeah. So this is something I was thinking about recently, actually. I think when it comes to messaging, messaging is sort of a theoretical concept. And a lot of people sit down and they'll write a messaging doc, and it'll include all of the details about how to talk about the product. But the truth is, when we take that messaging, that messaging can sometimes be very complex and hard to read. And I think that's somewhat normal, because messaging is meant to be executed. It's meant to be put out in the real world. And once you attempt to put it out in the real world, that's when you learn how to refine it. Why do you need to refine it? Because you need different aspects of your messaging at different points in the funnel for different personas. And so you can have one messaging doc, but if it includes all of your solutions, all of your use cases, and all of the points that you need to communicate across the entire funnel, it is going to be very complex. So I think that's important to realize what information, what message you need to give to what person at what point. And it's usually what I do is I break it down by stages of awareness. So we have unaware people who don't know that they have a problem. They're not really in market for your solution. You have problem aware people. They know they have a problem, don't know what the solution is yet. Solution aware, they understand generally what the solution could be. Product aware, they're comparing a few different options. And most aware, they're almost ready to buy. And so if you think about it that way, in your more top of funnel messaging, you want to really focus on the problems, agitate the problems, tell people why it's a huge concern, how much money they're investing because they're not solving this problem, how much time they're wasting because of this problem, et cetera, et cetera. Once you get to more middle stage, you want to focus on, here are the benefits. Here's what you're going to get out of this solution. And then when you focus on a little bit sort of bottom of the funnel content, you're going to want to focus more on the features, the details, the specific elements of your product that that are why you are better for them than your competitors. And then also introduce some of the friction reducers that will help assuage someone's fears, address any doubts, concerns they may have.
Yeah, so interesting. And tying that back to that, we maybe have two or more different buyer personas at the same time as we have different stages now. How do you handle that matrix of, messaging boxes that needs to be filled for different touch points?
Yeah, so I think that a lot of times this depends on how the campaigns are set up. So like, for example, a lot of times you're going to have more of a mid-market and more of an enterprise advertising campaigns. So for like, let's say most 80% of the Google campaigns you're running are mid-market, then you're probably going to focus on that. Whereas something more partner marketing might be more enterprise focused. Or something, a webinar might be more enterprise focused. And so usually you can speak to the campaign managers and understand, okay, who are we really targeting here? Sometimes when it comes to campaigns, like keywords, you can figure out, okay, this is, or ABM. ABM is where you're usually targeting specific accounts, and you know that those accounts are in a large company. So you know who they are and what they need to hear. So I say this is really where creative teams and campaign managers need to work together. And I think this is a huge pain point for a lot of companies. You have people who are sitting in front of dashboards and shifting bids and working on keyword research, and you have people coming up with creative campaigns, and they don't always know how to communicate with each other. And this is really where this can be really useful, if you can say, okay, these are exactly who these people are. This is the data we're seeing. Or even reverse, say, let's try these two campaigns and see which one works better. And then you can look at it and test it and figure out which data, which metrics you're looking at, which are important, which creatives are bringing in which leads. So I think this is where it's hard to guess. You can get a lot of information from the setup of the campaigns in the company. And then the information you can't get from that, you can get from testing. So it's important to have somewhat of an experimental mindset.
Wonderful. Love that. And another complexity that also comes into this discussion is how much of the messaging for the different personas in the different stages should be personalized or campaign specific versus brand consistent throughout the different journeys we take the clients. How do you handle that in a bigger company like Monday.com, for example?
Yeah, I think this is a huge question, because brands need to have a consistent brand identity. The way that I think about it is, I'm one person, I have one personality, but I speak differently to my mother than I speak to my best friend, than I speak to my colleagues. I have a different language that I use for each of those three people. And I think we can also think of that when we think of different campaigns. We can speak a little bit differently on Reddit than we speak on Facebook, than we speak in webinars. And that's okay, because it's the same person at the end of the day. Now, what is a person when it comes to marketing? I think that visual identity plays a huge part in this. Usually designers have a really clear set of guidelines. Do they use illustrations? Do they not use illustrations? What colors do they use? What fonts do they use? What stylistic techniques do they use? So that's going to keep things consistent. And a set of characteristics that you associate with your brand voice. So is it upbeat, or is it a little bit more sarcastic? Is it more authoritative, or is it more of a best friend kind of vibe? You can even kind of put a persona to it, like a best friend or an underdog, for example. That could be a clear persona for a brand voice. You are helping the little guy because all of the big corporations are taking advantage of him. And I think if you can put a brand voice to it and a brand visual identity, then that can help keep it consistent, even if you shift the way that you talk a little bit to align with each platform and each stage of the funnel.
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful. Another topic that ties into this that I personally really love is storytelling, and then the power of the story and things like that. We actually had a whole episode a few months ago with Philip Hum, who is a storytelling expert and so forth. And for every copywriter, there's always power in the great story if you can find one. But I know you have a few techniques around how tying that into the process and try to engage the prospects and so forth. Any Any tips or tricks around weaving the stories you can find or so?
Yeah, so I think that there are 5 key elements to storytelling. You have the plot. We already spoke about that, the problem, rising action, then the solution, and then the falling action. So that maps onto problem, agitation, solution. You have your product, which is sort of the assistant, the person, the element that helps them solve their problem. And you have the hero, which is the buyer persona. Now, I think the thing that a lot of marketers miss out on, which can really help take your storytelling to another level, is the enemy. The enemy is what's preventing them from solving their problem or keeping them stuck. So that could be, for example, whatever manual process they're using. Again, if they're using spreadsheets, if they are managing their payments manually, if they are managing their data manually, whatever that is, that could be the enemy. Or if you are running a webinar or giving away an ebook or white paper, maybe the enemy is that you're getting information from LinkedIn or from social media. They're not credible sources, and you're not getting the reliable information you need. Sometimes that's a competitor, like you think of the Mac versus the PC ads, where they dress the PC guy up in like a nerdy costume. But I think most of the time it can be something intangible. And when you have that intangible element, that's the enemy, then you can really mobilize people in another way, when you throw rocks at their enemy, so to speak. Yeah, so you have the plot, the main character, the assistant, the enemy, and I think the setting. You want to create a lot of details and context and bring the story to life. You want to show, not tell. So instead of describing what's going on, you want to show them how much it impacts them and how much better their life could be. So you want to bring in those tangible details that help bring the world alive.
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks. And let's move into a little bit about social selling and leveraging social media into our sales and marketing processes today, because it's so important and everybody's doing it, but it's hard to generate the results. It's not just, start posting or something like that, which everybody who have tried that quite soon realizes. You also need to do it good and consistently and things like that. But since you're working with this, a lot, how would you define social selling in today's B2B tech landscape, if you start there?
Yeah, well, social selling could be a few different things. A lot of people, when they refer to social selling, they refer to more of the sales side, actively posting and reaching out to people, setting appointments. Although I think it's valuable to think of organic social on the marketing side as almost social selling, because it helps shift your mindset from we're just doing this to gain awareness to we're doing this to really drive leads. And as marketing budgets become thinner and thinner, or smaller and smaller, and margins become thinner and thinner, organic social media is really a valuable way to get a lot of attention very quickly at a very reasonable cost. So I think when I talk about social selling, I mean shifting the mindset from we're just using this as a tool that we have to do, we have to get it on, we have to check this off the list, to this can really drive meaningful engagement.
Wonderful. Yeah. And what strategies do you typically recommend to use in order to build trust with prospects and drive your brand awareness in your ICP over social media for a B2B SaaS company, for example?
Yeah. So my favorite way to use social media is to use it in a very organic way, because the average user sees 4,000 ads a day. We can spot an
That's a
ad.
lot.
Exactly. We don't even realize how many we see, but the average user today can spot an ad from 100 miles away. And we're so good, we're so savvy at detecting them that we don't even see them. And so I think that it can be really valuable for brands to take more of an authentic, organic approach. So my favorite way to do this, it's very common to do an employee spotlight series. Say, this is Anna, she's our brand specialist, she likes to rock climb on the weekends, and she lives outside of Philadelphia, whatever. But I think that if you take employee spotlights, number one, instead of having a very polished corporate photo, you take a candid photo while she's in the office, while she's using the technology. If it's more of a field-based technology, while she's out in the fields or whatever industry that, whatever context where you would use the product. And she's smiling, interacting with people. It's not staged. That's number one. Number two, help to tell the company story through the person. So instead of focusing on her interests and hobbies, focus on what work is she doing and how does it contribute to our company narrative. And so this is a really good example of how companies can use social media, because they're repurposing their story. They're telling their story in another way, and the story of their product through the eyes of one of the employees and through the contributions of one of the employees. And I found that you could easily get 50 to 100 likes on a single post consistently when you use this technique, because number one, when you post about the individual, all of their friends and all of their colleagues will see it and they'll all like it and engage, and it creates that sense of camaraderie and good team spirit. And secondly, it doesn't look like a sales pitch. It looks like you are authentically telling someone's story and talking about them. So it comes off as very humble and authentic and a true bid for connection. So I think that's a really good example of how companies can reimagine their social strategy in a very modern way.
I love that. Yeah, great insights. And especially since we also nowadays, where everybody needs to be a little bit of a marketeer for themselves. We're, in the gig economy, as we say, where everybody needs to a little bit blow your own trumpet, so to say, in order to show what you can and that you're out there discussing stuff you're passionate about. And also, as Gary Vaynerchuk says, and have told us for 10 years now, that every company needs to be a media company these days and so forth. So any thoughts on how marketeers or leaders should brand themselves on social media?
Yeah, I think it's tricky for individuals because there's so much information out there. It can be hard to really stand out. But I say that I say go back to the basics. If you can offer, number one, if you can offer valuable, unique insights, and those can be really small insights. It doesn't have to be a huge new method of doing something. It could be a quick tip here and there. And to be consistent, that if you have one clear point of view, you stick to that point of view and you maintain that point of view. And then thirdly, I would say this is something I've noticed more recently. We spoke earlier about agitating the pain point, about top of funnel. You really want to be problem focused. This is something I think Winter does really well, that they put out a lot of memes about how it's how you shouldn't come up with random messaging, how you need to test your messaging. So they're a user testing platform. And they'll put a lot of memes, they'll put up a lot of jokes, and they're constantly, well, number one, they're reiterating their perspective, but number two, they're showing in a comedic way how difficult it is for companies that don't have clear messaging and don't test their messaging. So I would say that go back to the basics when it comes to mapping your message across the funnel. When in doubt, focus on the pain point and waking people up to the fact that this pain point is a significant problem.
Yeah, love that. One of the most common problems when coming to social media and trying to use it in an effective way is that a lot of people and companies go out with a fanfare and say, now we're going to post consistently. And you do that for a month or two, or maybe a half a year. But at some point, you start running out of gas. You don't have the original ideas of content, or just can't keep it up basically with the content creation pace that you have set out to keep. What's your thoughts about continually creating new content ideas?
Yeah, so I think that number one, not everything has to be super unique. The idea is to get people through the door. So if you used a concept 3 months ago, it's okay to revisit that concept and maybe rewrite it. Maybe try a different tone of voice. Maybe try a new format. Maybe try with a new image. It's okay to reuse things on social media. It's not a crime. And number two, I would say repurpose other content. So they're typically SaaS companies have a lot of content. They have webinars, they have news articles that come out, they have white papers, they have sales demos. So you can go through all of the content that you have and chop that up into a lot of different posts. So take a short clip from a recent webinar with an expert, put that up on social media. Go through the latest article and pick out quotes from the CEO or from the head of product. Make that into a post and repurpose the stuff that you already have. And then, yes, you should agitate the pain point a lot, but you can also sort of bring in other messages from other sides and other parts of your message map. Like, for example, it's really, really great to talk to salespeople and say, what concerns are customers bringing to the table? What doubts do they have when they start talking to you? And then take all of those examples and make those into social posts. That can be really, really helpful because you are addressing concerns that are preventing people from converting. So you're answering their questions before they have a chance to ask them.
Wonderful. Naomi, so great to talk to you today. That was awesome. I think everybody listening have learned a lot and got several good ideas that we can bring back to our daily lives now. Thank you so much for that inspiration and tips and tricks. So people who wonder who the heck is Naomi or Storylink and so forth, where can they read more about you or your content or your company?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn, Naomi Soman, and you can find me on my website. That's Storylogick, logick.com. And my email is team@storylogick.com if you want to email me directly.
Wonderful. And I'm sure they will. Thank you so much for your time. I wish you all the best now and have a great day.
Thank you so much.